Okay, we have returned after a little bit of a hiatus. Let me see. Yep, camera, audio. Okay, good to go. What are we gonna talk about today? I got a little adjustment here. I think on my camera. Hold please. Sometimes I have to. Things look a little off. Looks a little bit better. Okay. That looks a little better. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it today. And we're going to talk about our reality realigning because I feel like this is a big one. And we're going to kind of piece together how that happens and get rid of some of the myths on how it does not happen. Because once you start trying to realign your reality to the highest, to the higher timelines, to heavenly timelines, all the buzzwords you hear, all the buzzwords we even say on this channel, sometimes we don't know how it happens, or we think it happens in some magical way. And it's not that some can feel magical, but it's not like there's no effort. And some of the content you see, it acts like it's like a Cinderella kind of thing. You just do that, or Wizard of Oz, let's clip her heels 3 times, and all of a sudden it's all going to change and it's going to be great. So I want to kind of break that down because we want to get rid of the misconceptions on how it doesn't happen. Because when it doesn't happen the way we think it's going to happen, we feel like we're not doing it right and we failed in some way. And that's a huge thing around ascension because there's so I even hate the word misinformation, but there's so many. It's not even misinformation, but when everyone's at a different place and a different part of ascension, our interpretation is different. My interpretation of how I created reality 3 years ago is not what I would sit here and regurgitate now or talk about now, because I know that's like a teeny bit of the truth, a teeny bit of part of it. It's a facet of it because I couldn't see the whole thing. I could only see a part of it. If you can only see a part of it, you're missing so much more. So we're going to kind of try to fill in the gaps on that. Because when we get into every linear year, even though our templates come in, August, and when we get into the summer solstice, we start to do a lot of deep clearing to get rid of a lot of the stuff we can't carry on so we can do our next template. So we get into our next template, we start getting that in. To me, I usually feel that around the fall pretty strong. What am I going to focus on in the next linear year? Because even though there's no time, to me there are different things we accomplish every year. Even though we might not hit the ground running till April of a new linear year, we're doing all of the integration of the consciousness work to be able to have our feet on the ground by some part next year, because there is the beginning phase, which is becoming the consciousness, living the consciousness, which can be years in the making, and then now we're going to have feet on the ground and start to do it. We're going to start to actually do the consciousness. So you want to keep that stuff in mind. You'll kind of have an inkling of what your 2025 is going to be. You're going to have an idea of what you're going to focus on. What's the theme going to be? What was the theme of last year? Have we buttoned it all up? I know a lot of the stuff I was trying to do last year, I think it was last year, it might have even been to this year, I don't even know. Kind of kept getting derailed, so I think it's probably going to be 2025 before I start doing some of the stuff I wanted to get done last year. So, but that's a little off topic. So let me try to get back on topic because I do really want to get this forth today. How do our realities realign? And there's a lot of different ways this can happen. And the first thing we do, and whether you're in your awakening, whether you're in different parts of ascension, it doesn't really matter. You have to integrate in the consciousness first. And that can take years to integrate in a consciousness because you can hit the high point of the consciousness. You can hit the consciousness and see a lot of things and feel the feeling of the higher consciousness, that energy, that kind of you can kind of start to feel and see and expand, but you can't really live it yet, right? One, your body frequency is not that frequency. I'll always say your reality is not your reality till your body sets in that reality. It's just, people will say living from the future is another way people say it, because you can kind of see it and then you're trying to create that if it was something you wanted to create. But our realities shift and change in so many different ways that we sometimes don't see our part in it or understand we have to take part in it. It's not just like we manifest it by just the human way is we're just gonna I'm gonna think about it, it's gonna happen. That's not how ascended realities happen. You can get there in some ways by it kind of realigning itself. And some realities are going to realign themselves, but there's some that we have to take an active part in, and that's a majority of them. In my experience, some will realign, but we don't normally like that process of them realigning on their own. Because to me, when something realigns on its own, majority of the time, it's because I didn't want to realign it, right? I had the story around it, I had an attachment to it, I didn't believe there was another reality after that, or I didn't like the one that was presented to me because I'd have to work through a lot of really deep, heavy stuff to get there. So I didn't want to do it. So it realigned on its own. And that's normally not the way you want to go. You don't want it to realign on its own, majority of the time. So first, in our human realities, let's kind of take a step back for a second. In our human realities, our worlds would realign, right? We get new jobs. We would get new partners. We would move to a different place. We would maybe redecorate our home. We would move to a new home. We would move to a new city. We were always doing stuff to shift, our surroundings. And we might not have done them every, 6 months. We might not have done them every year. It might have been 10 to 20 years when these things would shift and happen. You got married, you got divorced, you got remarried. It was longer. You didn't have these major shakeups. And there's a reason for that. It's just our frequency doesn't shift that much. So even when we would change a location, we would still feel like we're in the same program. We're kind of running, we're in a different level of the program in a sense because things are a little different, but the energetic makeup of the program was the same because we hadn't really cleared the whole thing. So we were still kind of running the same pattern. And patterns have one thing in common. They always end the same way. So we would kind of feel like that's how we get on these loops, right? We would get in these loops, these patterns, and we'd always end up kind of in the same place, whether we lose the job or quit the job, or the job would just go away, or even if we left on our own, or the relationships would kind of go the same way because we're kind of in the same pattern. We didn't shift enough, because we were letting the shifts happen. We were driven by the external to shift, right? We were driven by, I just got this job offer. And that's how we would move through realities. Very rarely we would say, hey, I'm just going to pick them and do all this. Can't say it never happens. But the majority of the time are shifts because we were reacting to external stimuli. Oh, wait, I lost that job. Now I got to go find a new job. What was happening energetically under it all was our frequencies were shifting and these things were getting moved out. All of a sudden, people I used to like, I'm arguing with. So this friend group is getting moved out. I'm getting a whole new friend group. We were realigning ourselves, even if it was very incrementally, to different frequencies because of the external stimuli. Our external was reshaping for us. Now, that's only because our internal was changing. But in our human consciousness, we don't connect that, right? We don't connect that. We don't understand. Why did this thing end so poorly? Because it was ending anyway. We didn't want to end it, so it ended for us. And you look back on that once you can get to different higher states of consciousness and understand why those realities went that way, why it wasn't going to work, why that couldn't happen the way we wanted it to. But you can only see that when you're looking back at it. Almost looking down on it from a higher consciousness, you could understand why these realities just didn't work. And the energetic undertone was even happening back then. We just didn't understand it. So you start getting to awakening, right? You start getting through your ascension. And all of a sudden, you start hearing, higher line realities. We're going to shift our reality. We're bringing soul line realities, all the buzzwords, ascended realities, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't really matter. And it happens faster because your reality is shifting faster, especially if you're consciously working on ascending your consciousness. That's a lot of consciousness in one sentence, but you get where I'm going. When we're consciously trying to ascend, we're listening to higher consciousness content, we're reading, we're into crystals, we're into Andaras, we're into all these things that are starting to pull us away from human consciousness and reset us on another path. It's our time, so to speak, you know? It's our time to live in a different reality. It's our time to let the human realities go. Now, it doesn't happen overnight because our DNA, our human consciousness is so ingrained in our cellular programming that it's not an overnight process. So you will go through a lot of your awakening, a lot of the beginning of your ascension, and not a lot changes, right? It can all kind of be kind of a blur. I can look back on maybe 3 to 4 years where not a lot changed. Not a lot seemed to really shift. Maybe a couple friend groups would shift here and there, but it was still kind of the same pattern, but with a different friend group. You know, it would kind of always end the same way, would always have kind of the same trajectory. Um, but that was one thing I could see, even in my human consciousness and my awakening, that pattern. Relationship patterns with friends, with, romantic partners, they kind of had a very similar trajectory. The pattern was the same, right? But what you're going to notice is when you start getting into your ascendant realities, you're going to start to see things shift quicker, but we're the one doing the shift, right? Our external, even our human realities, our external was in response to us. Our internal frequency had changed, our external's realigning, right? We can't stay at this business anymore. We can't do this job anymore. Can't have this friend anymore. We can't have this lover anymore, whatever it was. The more conscious you become, you understand that your internal is shifting. You start to feel different. And this thing comes on with you where all of a sudden the outside world is not fitting with you anymore. And this is how things start to realign. So we can go about this in two different ways. You can realign it yourself based on how you feel about things, or you can wait for it to realign on its own. So, which to do when? You might all of a sudden notice you're going to achieve a consciousness, right? You're going to hold the consciousness, and that can be years down the road. The consciousness you will be working with, like feet on the ground, putting it into reality, bringing your body into that reality in 2025, is a consciousness you probably hit and embodied back in 2023. And you were embodying it for the last couple of years. But you hit the frequency, and then you spent the rest of maybe the 2 years after that clearing what's not that frequency. That's what we call the clearing phases. That's the programming, clearing our programming. You hit a certain frequency, and to bring your body into that frequency, your consciousness can hit it, but your body can't hit it till you clear everything that's not that frequency. If you're working on, Christ frequency, and that's what you hit, and now you're trying to embody that. Well, anywhere where you are not acting as that Christed being, you have to realign that reality to act that way, or it will get aligned for you. That's that process of embodying in that consciousness. You have to become the consciousness. If you don't become the consciousness, then nothing rearranges. So after you've embodied the consciousness, and it could be it doesn't really matter even what aspect you're working on, what energetic aspect you're trying to embody, what you're trying to embody. You're just going to know when you've hit a different place, because all of a sudden the reality around you will start to bug you. And it can be the paint color. We're going to go with some simple things at first. The paint color is really on your nerves. Throw rugs, you don't like them anymore. You're all of a sudden there are too many weeds in your yard. You need to be weeding. You need to be sprucing up your area. That's a big sign for me that my body has shifted. And what starts to happen is your external cannot support your new body frequency, right? So your body is saying, we have to realign this because this isn't supporting me, right? So it's time to maybe do a little overhaul of your home. The bigger ones, you have to move to a new home because we have these places where we can spruce things up, and we can change out rugs, we can redo carpet, we can change the exterior, upgrade the exterior to support our new frequency. But until we get to a certain phase where you get to that place where you're going to kind of stay, and because we do a lot of moving around and shifting around during the bulk of our ascension process, we kind of can upgrade what we have. All of a sudden you're going to notice, oh, things are breaking down. My washing machine doesn't work anymore, and oh my God, the flooring's coming up. It's your way of your universe saying we have to work on this. this is not supporting me anymore. I have to now come in and I got to clear all this stuff out. So we have to physically do that. We have to physically shift stuff out. And if you don't have the funds to do it, ask for your funds to do it. Ask for people to support you in doing it. You might meet someone that can lay flooring, and all of a sudden you can get a new floor or whatever it is. I know flooring is what I'm doing right now, so that's why it's on the top of my mind. But stuff will bother you. Friends will start to bother you. Partners will start to bother you. Because the frequency where they are and the frequency where you are it's gotten so far apart. You're not enjoying it. Your body's resisting your new. It's resisting its surroundings because they have to be realigned. It's not supporting you. You might not feel well when you're around certain people anymore. You might not be, because your body's rejecting it. You go to this job you used to really enjoy. Now you can't even go there anymore because you just physically feel sick when you walk in the door. You get an email and you feel like, oh, having a great day, and you get an email and you're like, oh God, this fucking sucks. I hate this job. Where maybe a year ago you really enjoyed it. But all of a sudden it doesn't support you anymore. Your body is now somewhere else and you have to realign to get there. That's what it means to realign on a soul level. That's what you're doing. It can be that simple. It doesn't have to be all of a sudden I'm doing this massive thing to shift the total course of humanity. Every little thing you do shifts the total course of humanity. Because you're starting the shift. It starts one person at a time. That's how the collectives get built. It's not just all of a sudden there's a collective. One person breaks off from the human collective and then someone else breaks off. Now you're starting a new collective. But you're starting to align things on a soul reality because you can see that it's not aligned anymore, right? You can see that this isn't working for me anymore. It can be the littlest things and it can be the biggest things. You might feel like I can't even stay in this home anymore. Also you're going to see. So there are things we will see to do to shift. And I will promise you will find a way to do it. Whether it's the funds will come in some weird way, or you'll meet someone that can assist you with it and you might barter services. You will be able to do the shift that you feel like you need to do. I promise you that. It might not come how you think it's going to come. It might not come the way you want it to come, but you will be able to do it. You'll be able to complete that shift. You'll be able to make that reality align with your new frequency of your body. You'll also know, so that's how we're physically changing something, right? And we have to do the physical change. We don't just sit there and go, okay, I want a new reality, and you just wait. I'm just gonna wait. I'm gonna wait and see what happens. Nothing's gonna happen, okay? You see what you gotta do, you gotta go do it. You got to find a way. You got to ask your universe to bring you the way when we're sure this thing's got to go. And sometimes you'll know ahead of time. It's okay for now, but I know this has got to go probably in the next 6 months. So we start planning for that. That's where we get back into living from the future. You see, it's just you're basically living from a different frequency. Your frequency is getting to the point where this can't support it anymore. Maybe we can put a coat of paint on it for another year or so. Maybe we can't. Only you're going to know that, but you're going to know it's not working. I promise you're going to know it's not working. Whether you want to admit it's not working, that's a whole nother subject. But you're going to know it's not supporting your body. You're going to know when you've shifted your frequency. You're going to know it's all of a sudden so grating on your nerves, you can't stand it. You don't even want to be around it. You don't want to do it because it's now not in tune anymore. Your body's setting at a different frequency, and you've got to upgrade your reality to support your body. That's what soul aligned reality, that's what that means. It's not we're waiting around for something to just hit us on the head. And you don't want to be hit on the head. We're going to get to that part. So you see it, you understand. If you don't have if money's an issue, if time's an issue, it's all energy. Money's energy, time's energy. If you don't have the energy to get this stuff done, ask to see how you're supposed to do it. You will get your answer. It might not be the way you want to do it, but you will get an answer. You don't set longer, because usually we just don't like the way we get the answer. You'll know, sometimes our landlord's not aligned anymore. I had a situation like that where I knew I could stay at a place for so long, but it was not aligned. The relationship wasn't aligned. It wasn't balanced. Landlord-tenant is a harder relationship to balance anyway, because it starts off kind of with the reality and a power imbalance, right? So we have to kind of be able to understand that's not a real power imbalance. That's our human beliefs that there is a power imbalance there. So there's a lot of times where we see things kind of way ahead of time that this is going to be okay for a while, and I can shift this a little bit, but long term it might not support. If you live in the city, you're going to see probably down the road, it's too many people here. This is not going to support my body when I get to a certain frequency. Yes, I can spend more time maybe inside, maybe I can spend more time outside, I can spruce up the inside of my house, but long term, I know that sooner or later I'm going to have to shift to somewhere else. My frequency will get too far from it. You will also know, to me, another big thing when you're starting to shift frequencies is, you will get things leaving. Some things will just leave. Some people will just pass away because in the frequency you're at now, there are other things you need to do. And if you're taking care of people who are ill or taking care of people who are toward the end and they're not going to transition here, they're not going to ascend in their body, you might see those people either just leave through death or just leave. So some things, when I say, there's some things that will realign themselves, but we don't kind of like the way that happens, and people just kind of fade away. I've had a couple fadeaways the last couple of years, and you just kind of know when it's happening, and I never try to go back and pull anybody back into a reality I'm in, because we start to understand after a while that they're just not meant to be here. They're doing something else. When they're meant to be here, they'll show back up. We don't need to drag someone else in, because what we're dragging ourselves back down to a different frequency and a different reality so someone else can come with us, right? Because we don't like the whole part that everyone can't come with us. We want certain people to be on the journey with us, and if it's not their path, it's not their time, they're not going to be on the journey with us. So you're going to have some things that will align on their own. Animals will pass away. That's another huge one, that a lot of people don't enjoy that, but there's a reason why a lot of animal life expectancies are certain amounts of time, where we have big shifts every 7 years, every 10 years, every 12 years. You'll notice even in your human consciousness, if you go back to when pets passed away, it was usually when you're about to shift in a pretty big way. Speaking of pets. Right on cue. Right on cue, little man. Right on cue. Or you'll get new ones. So these are things where things can kind of realign on their own. You might all of a sudden see certain things just fall into place a little bit easier. And like I said, normally some of these things we don't like them the way they happen. A lot of times our animals will also pass because we have to clear a lot. Sometimes we'll get the animal passing before the big shift, before we move somewhere, before we get married, before we get divorced, before our kids go to college, before we go to college. Because they have animals, or human death can affect us in a way where it really helps us clear, and we grieve, and the grieving clears out our cellular memory, i.e. uplifting us to a different frequency, because we're clearing out all that cellular memory and all that grief, because they activate all that grief. It's not really so much attached to them, they just bring it up, because we feel the grief, and all of a sudden it unleashes all the grief we're carrying over multidimensional lifetimes and our human lifetime. So sometimes the pet part of it will kind of happen before you see the big shift. It's on the horizon, and all of a sudden that dog I had when I was, married to this other person passes away right before the divorce is final, right before I've been divorced for a year and I'm moving to a whole new area, because that animal technically ties you to a different timeline because of the memories attached to the animal, and they know they have to go. They know that they're attaching you to something else, and it's time for you to go forward and move on. A lot of ascension is moving on. We just don't like the fact that we have to move on without things we wanted to go with us. And that is some of the hardest parts we reconcile with in ascension, that majority of people are not going to be where you are, and the ones that are in your life is so you can assist them with their process. You can show them what higher consciousness is, living from that conscious, living from your purity of your soul. But if they're not ready to live that, and they're not ready to be that, then they will go and do their journey their way. And if they're supposed to be with you later on, I promise you they'll come back. But letting them go is a lot of the kind of the harshest thing we have to do. So The cat is really. All the cats are they always know, especially when I'm talking about animals. They just pop right up. It's so funny. Energetically, they're reading the field like, are you talking about me? Are you talking about me? I'm gonna be right there behind you. Okay, so some things are going to realign on their own in ways we don't like it. Like sometimes it'll be right, almost a catalyst to the shift. If you have an animal pass away, you're about to do a shift. It's almost like you just know. That's a big one. If someone passes away, you're about to do a shift. Even in our human consciousness, even though the shifts were not as, the frequency we were uptaking was not a lot. Where in a sense you're kind of on steroids in a sense with how fast you're shifting, because you're consciously working at shifting. You're surrounding yourself with material to shift. You know when you're in your human programming. You know when you see a program pop up. We might get lost in it for a while, but every time you get lost in it and you come out of it, you'll be like, oh shit, I got lost in that again. It'll be shorter and shorter every time because you're clearing more and more of it every time we get lost in it. So the last one I want to touch on, because I don't want this to be super long, but the last one I do want to touch on is when it collapses. And this can revert back to, the animals passing away, people just leaving. Us not wanting to do what we can see we have to do. We can see, oh wait, there's some things I'm really being drawn to do. I really feel like I'm supposed to do these things, but I don't want to do them. I don't want to sell the house. I don't want to sell my car. I don't want to have to move to a different place. I don't want to leave my job because I might not get another job paying as much. All the human stories that come in. But when we are in ascension, even when our human consciousness kind of work the same way, but it might not have been as drastic. You'll find in ascension it's all a lot more heavy-handed in a sense, especially when you get to certain parts of it, when you know this is not aligned. You have been seen, it's not aligned with where your body's at now. You have to shift, but because you don't like the options of where you might have what you see right now, or you don't even see where you're supposed to go. Because that's the other thing. A lot of times we can't see the next reality till we start realigning the one we have to match where our body frequency is. We don't even believe there's another one. And as a human, we wanted to have that next thing right there before we left. We wanted to have the new partner set up. We wanted to have the new boyfriend in the wings before we left the old one. We wanted to have the new job offer before we said goodbye to the old one. Those are our human beliefs to always have, another bird in the hand. We're just not going to walk away. That's not what our human will do. Our human very rarely will just walk away. It wants to have something else. I'm not going to sell my house till I've already figured out where I want to go and I've already got all that set up. Now I'll do that. It's our human belief to do that, to have all this, and now I'm going to have all this. It doesn't work that way in ascension because they're different frequencies. The frequencies we're trying to reach are way too far away. We can't go from here to here and keep all this. And then we'll get all this. But until all this is set up, I'm not getting rid of all this. This has to go before this is even possible. It's not even a possibility because our frequency is too low for it to even be a possibility. In our human consciousness, it worked because we're here to here. It's such a small amount we're ticking up. We can still keep a little bit of some here and then go up here a little bit and then whoop, there I am. But it's such a small tick up that we could do it. Because we really weren't shifting that much. We weren't really clearing on any fast level. We weren't even conscious of what we were doing. We were just being what we would say smart about it, right? I'm not going to quit my job till I have another one. I mean, how many people would get a lot of shit if you quit your job and didn't have something lined up? I know I did that a couple of times. But I did that a couple of times because I was listening to other people. It still was not aligned when I did it. It was not aligned when I did it. But that's a different program to go through. So we have to realign before we can see the next possibilities. We have to realign sometimes or close the reality completely out before we can see the new one come in. And that's where the fear comes in because we don't know what's next. We don't even know what soul aligned looks like. But these are some ways we start to see it. And like I said, a lot of times it can be easy as just kind of moving things around or all of a sudden everything breaks at the same time. because your frequency is spinning it out of control in a sense. Think about it in that way too. Your frequency is gonna, now that it's higher, it's gonna now, think of it as like a video game, it's gonna now target what's a lower frequency for it to be extinguished, right? To be taken out of your reality. It's gonna, nope, that's gotta go, that can't stay. You know, it's almost telling you, yeah, these things don't work. And if you don't listen, your frequency is spinning so much quicker. Your body frequency is going to be spinning at such a even though we kind of spin slower in a sense, your frequency is at such a rate, it's going to now start to offset some of this stuff. Your computer's going to break. Your washing machine is going to break. Everything's going to start to break. Technology will go haywire because you're almost short-circuiting. You're short-circuiting it in a sense because your frequency is at that higher state where, even though technically our body spins a little bit slower, but your frequency is at such a high rate that all of a sudden it's short-circuiting this stuff out. So, like I said, some things we just kind of, we're kind of forced to do it. A lot of stuff we kind of see, this has got to go. When we get to what we don't want to go and the things start collapsing, it's because we don't want to let them go. You know, we don't suffer collapses, and we get to certain parts of ascension once we understand that the collapses were when we are at a higher consciousness, looking back at the collapses. Even if we're in our ascension process, I still had collapses because I didn't want to do it. You know, I didn't want to have to do what I knew I had to do, so it would just collapse on me. Even if I started doing it and I didn't really want to follow through with it because I didn't like the path I was going to be set on next. I didn't like the reality I had to go do because it was going to put me through a lot of deep clearing and a lot of deep ancestral clearing. I didn't want to do it. I had a lot of judgment around doing certain things. I didn't want to go do them. I would hold on to the last moment and then things start to collapse. How do you know you're in a collapse? You know, if you're you know, in a house, you know you gotta sell, you don't want to sell it, you know it's not going to support you, and you keep feeling I've got to shift, I've got to do something. One of the biggest red flags you're going to get is your reality is not going to support it anymore. You won't get the money to support it, you won't get the time to support it, you won't have, so, you know, remember, money, time, it's all energy. You won't have any of that supported anymore. So you're going to be in a corner where, okay, all of a sudden I can't pay the mortgage for this place. All of a sudden, okay, I can't pay for these things anymore. Whether it was groups you were in or, you know, things you were participating in that you had funds for, all of a sudden those funds dry up. That's a big flag that this is not supported anymore. You cannot use, let's flip that a different way. You cannot use money that is now going to be coming from a higher frequency, so a totally different reality, totally different frequency. The money's coming in a totally different frequency to support that old frequency. Okay, it's not going to work. It's like trying to take, you know, human money and go to, you know, fairyland and pay, or paying fairy money in human realities and paying human realities in fairyland. It doesn't work that way. Currency's different in a sense. It won't support you. And when the money is not supporting these things, that's a big flag that something is amiss. And normally those are the ways our reality gets our attention. Or sometimes maybe you just won't feel good. That's another one. You know, your health will get your attention. These are not aligned anymore. When you can't afford to do it, and I don't mean can't afford it, don't want to. Have the money but don't want to pay for it. I mean the money is not there to do this. It's not coming in to do this. It's not like I can even reallocate it. It's just not there. A huge flag that it's time to really look at, is this long term? You know, am I supposed to keep this long term, or am I supposed to now shift this into something else? Because what'll happen is we will try then to figure all these other ways to support these things that they're like, it's like a dying tree branch. It's a dying timeline in a sense. It's falling away. And if we keep trying to grab hold of it, you know, everything that allowed us to keep it, whether it be time or money, will go away. And you won't be able to anymore. Because it's keeping you in a lower frequency. So all these things start to happen. And like I said, some stuff we're going to say we have to do. And normally that's the stuff that we don't have a lot of attachment to. Some of that stuff's a little bit easier to see. The stuff we have emotional attachment to can be harder for us to admit it has to shift. Can we realign some relationships? Sometimes. I could for a while, but I also found that if people were not actively pursuing ascension and higher consciousness, it was very hard to keep human consciousness in your reality for long periods of time because it does affect our frequency after a while, and it can get more and more and more challenging to keep that stuff around, especially when the other people are not even trying to shift. And I've done videos before on when do you leave, when do you stick, when do you twist, when do you go. If we try for years and years to align a relationship and it never can get beyond just a human relationship of you do this for me, I'll do this for you. When the shit hits the fan, it's always self-preservation for human consciousness. It's how it was, it's how we were, it's the same way. You kind of start to see that it's not going to work. And the hardest thing to me in ascension is to really look at something and say, it's just not going to work. And to me, it's even worse. It was in our human consciousness, we would sometimes get that almost like that epiphany. We were in something and we just knew. To me, we felt it more in relationships, so we just could look and go, it's just not going to work. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I do. This is not going to work, is it? There's just no way it's going to work. And the same thing will happen in your soul on realities, where you can look at something, but we look at it from a different consciousness. We can look at it from the whole picture, our whole soul plan, our whole understanding of what we can see in that moment. We're always going to be able to see more. But in that moment, you'll be able to see so much more than you could when you're in your human consciousness to understand why, this is not going to work, is it? It's just no way right now this is going to go any farther. And putting any more energy into this is just a waste when I could go create something over here with someone else or just create something on my own. A lot of ascension is on our own anyway. Because if we can't function on our own, then we're not sovereign beings. And that's the whole part of ascension. Humans are all want to be all entangled up together, whether it be in person or, all online. Everyone's got to be entangled in everybody's business. That's human mentality. Ascended mentality, soul-aligned consciousness is different than human consciousness. It just, you can't compare the two. But because we live so much from human consciousness, it's a big shift to start to move over. So your reality is going to be realigning, and the more priority you put on your ascension process, the quicker it's going to go. Now that does not mean overnight everything shifts. It can feel like that sometimes, like all of a sudden something really drastic will happen like one day and you'll be like, oh my God. But usually we know way ahead of time these things are coming. Now, when the moment comes, sometimes it can still feel like, wow, I thought I was ready. But, that's why we can see so far in advance, because we get a chance to, if we're grieving a reality, we kind of get a chance to pre-grieve in a sense. See all of it coming before it happens, start to cut the cord so it start to understand why it's got to be that way. So when we get there, we've kind of worked through a lot of it. We've kind of dealt with the fact that this reality has to go because there's other ones I have to go do. And there's other ones they have to go do. Whether they're doing it in that body or not, there's still other realities they have to go do. And accepting that is how quickly we can then shift into the next one and how we can start to build our new reality. Whereas from our human reality, we would react from the external circumstances and move from there, not understanding we were really doing it. We just didn't realize it. In ascension, we know we're doing it. And we know, I called for all these amazing higher realities. Now they're here. And now, I don't want to do it. Now I'm afraid. Now I don't want to do any of these things because now it's so different than what I thought. It's so kind of feels so unhinged from human consciousness of what that would be acceptable in that human consciousness and what now I'm being called to do over here. So it always is going to be shifting and twisting in a lot of different ways. So I think we're going to leave it there. I'm going to check my chat. I know I went a long time today, but I wanted to kind of get through that. Okay. I will take questions if we have any. I don't think we're going to have any, though. We don't have any yet, so I think we're probably pretty good with that. Seems anything else. I think that covers a lot of it. And I think it's important to remember it's going to be shifting. some things we're going to see to do, and some things we're going to just do because we see it. Let's just get it done. Let's just trudge through it. I am one person. When I see I got to do it, I am on a mission statement to do it. And that's one of the things. We talk a lot about our astrology signs and the signs we're born into. Yes, they have a distorted part in our human consciousness, but once we clear the distortions of we kind of dissociate from our astrological sign for a lot of parts of our ascension, kind of bring it back in, but we've kind of cleaned it up where we're not kind of doing that shadowy part of our sign. We're now reacting from the attributes that'll help us with ascension. That's why we were born in that sign, to help us. And I was born in, under Taurus. So I am a big, let's get it done. And when I get my mind on it, let's get it done. And once I made that commitment, it's done, And one of the big things about Taurus energy is once, in our human consciousness, it takes us a long time to make up our mind, right? That's a big trope of Tauruses. When we're living so from our human consciousness, the human aspect of that astrological sign, long time to make a choice. But once you make it, forget about it. Whatever the other choice was, once I go against it, it's dead to me, and I'm not going back. We're not a flippy floppy sign in that sense. We're not an air sign. We're not even a water sign. We're the more emotional of the earth signs, but we don't go back, right? I make that decision, that shit is done, and it might have taken me a year to get there, but once I'm there, it's over. We're not going to revisit it. It's finished. Now, in Ascension, like I said, all our signs kind of get a little cleaned up. And we react from the purity of those signs. And, Taurus is kind of famous for, we kind of barrel through and get it done. And when I see something I got to do, that's what I'm going to do. I'm almost nonstop trying to get it done. So, all right. Okay. We're going to leave it at that. And I'll see everyone next time.